Today's measurement assignment asked you to do a few things with fractions of an inch. You had to simplify, you had to multiply, and then you had to look at the actual fractions and figure out how many would be in each portion. So let's take a look at some of these questions. When we're talking about the parts of an inch, it's important to remember that every single line in the fraction is something out of 16. So your first line on the ruler is 1/16. Going forward, you'll count 2/16, 3/16, and so on and so forth. Every time you have an even number numerator over that 16, you should simplify it, which means reduce your fraction. If you reduce the fraction 2/16, you're actually going to split both the numerator and the denominator in half. Half of 2 gives us 1. Half of 16 gives us 8. So this is why our reduced fraction above is 1/8. 1/8 is the same thing as 2/16. They're just different ways of writing that amount. So if someone were to ask you how many 16ths are in an eighth, the answer would be 2, because 2/16 are the same thing as 1/8. So your assignment asks you many similar questions. If I were to ask you how many 16ths are in an inch, well, I would say, okay, here's the whole inch, 1. I don't ever write 16 over 16. That would probably go down here if I did. But I know that 15 was the line just before the entire inch. So I know that if I were to keep counting, it would be 16 over 16. So there are 16 16ths in 1 inch. We're going to use this ruler here without all of the fractions to help us, and we're going to do a couple examples from your assignment today. Now, one of your questions said how many 16ths are in a half inch, and you had the fraction half here to help you. Now, if I take this ruler and I say, okay, I know there are 16 16ths in 1 inch. Half of that inch is here. I could count all the lines, or I could say to myself, well, 16 is the number I know is always in an inch. What is half of 16? That's one way to look at it. If we're struggling, we can look at a picture of a ruler and count these lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's where I stop for my half inch. There are 8 16ths. Another question on your assignment said, how many 16ths are in 3/4 of an inch? So I could say to myself, what is 3/4 of 16? If you're good at math, you know that 3/4 of 16 is 12, because 3 times 4 is 12. But if we're not sure, we go back over to the ruler, and I know that this is my 3/4 line. I would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I can also send a screenshot of the picture that we used earlier, if you would like. That was this. That helps you, because I also know that 3/4 is equal to 12 16ths. As you went along, the questions got a little bit more complex. So now it asks how many eighths are in 3/4 of an inch. Well, looking at my ruler, let me magnify it a little bit here. Okay, so if I look at this ruler a little bit larger, now my eighths are every other line. So this is 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5, 6, 7/8, and then of course 1 inch would be 8 over 8. But we don't really write fractions that are the same in both our numerator and our denominator. So really, I would never write that. So the question was, how many eighths are in 3/4 of an inch? Well, I'm going to go back and I'm going to find my 3/4 mark, which is right here. And then I'm going to say to myself, okay, I know eighths are every other line on the ruler. How many did I use? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I also know that if I were to use math for this, I could use multiplication, because now we are doing the opposite of simplifying this fraction, because I'm moving from quarters back to eighths. So I could say to myself, all right, what number do I need to use to multiply 4 to get to 8? 4 times what? You probably know that that's going to be 4 times 2. So if I did 4 times 2, I have to also do that to the top. So I'm going to do 3 times 2, and I'm going to do 4 times 2. And my new fraction, 3 times 2, would give me 6 as a numerator. 4 times 2 would give me 8 as my numerator. So how many eighths are in 3/4 of an inch? Just like we counted a moment ago, we would have 6. How many quarters make up 1 inch? I would have to count. Here's 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4. Your inch is your whole, all right? So I'm saying that as the word WHOLE. This is your whole unit. Please excuse my very poor computer handwriting there. So if I want to know a quarter of something, the word quarter always has to do with when it's split up into 4 pieces. A football game has 4 quarters. A dollar has 4 quarters. So no matter what you're asking about, if you're talking about the whole unit and you say how many quarters are there, the answer will be 4 no matter what in life you're talking about. Then you had a question like this: how many eighths make up 10 inches? Well, before we worry about 10 inches, we really need to figure out how many eighths are in 1 inch. So now if I think about this, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, that also makes sense, because if your whole is split up into 8 pieces, they would be called eighths. So we didn't really have to count those. We know that there were 8 pieces. So if 1 inch equals 8 eighths, what I really need to know is this number here, the number 8. Now I'm going to take that number and figure out however many inches they really want for the answer. So there's 8 of them, but there's 10 inches. So I would multiply 8 times 10, and that would give me 80. At the end, you had a question that had several parts. There were even some questions that asked you to do both sixteenths and eighths. In this question, it says how many eighths are in, and they're asking about the fraction down here, 10 sixteenths. So what do I do to change a number from 16 to 8? Well, I have to split it up, which means I have to divide. And when I divide in fractions of measurement, we know that we've always used the number 2. So I can divide by 2 and say, okay, 10 divided by 2 gives me 5. 16 divided by 2 gives me 8. So I can see that there would be 5 eighths. If for some reason I didn't have 8 here, like say it asked me how many fourths were in this fraction, I would just keep reducing. So let's just say that the question did ask me about fourths or quarters. If I had to keep going, I would divide by 2 again until my denominator is a 4. 5 divided by 2 would not work for measurement, just so you're aware. It would be 2.5. And then 8 divided by 2 would be 4. I don't even want to write it because it's not really a measurement that we would use. But I just wanted to show you the procedure that if 16 divided by 2 was not the unit that they were asking about, what you would do. All right, so let's just, there we go. So now we do know that our answer for part A is 5. Part B says, what is this fraction in its lowest form? Well, we just changed the whole fraction. And now that I have a numerator that's an odd number, I know that it's in the lowest form because I can't simplify any further. You know how I just didn't want to write 2.5? That's because it doesn't exist. We cannot make it into anything in a more simplified version. This is your answer. I hope that helps you. Let me know if you need anything else, and I'll be happy to get in touch and send you another video.